What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is one I've been wanting to do for a couple months, and I'm just now filming this on October 26th of 2024, and that is 2014, a year in film that changed me. So arguably one could say in my personal life that 2012 and 2013 really was the type of years that had a huge impact on me in regards to my film going and just, my love for TV shows. But arguably, I would say 2014 was the year where it just was a huge splash for me. And by that, let me explain. 2012, 2013 was when I started actually paying attention to like IMDb's top 250. And I started going outside my wheelhouse in regards to movies that I might not have necessarily had seen as a 15, 16-year-old. But I started actually watching, and then 2013 was when I actually started watching R-rated movies because, for context, I grew up in a very religious household, so I wasn't allowed to watch R-rated movies. So I had to try to, sneakily watch R-rated movies on a cracked iPod screen. Yeah, that's right. I had a cracked iPod that I watched movies on. Yeah, that's my life. But 2014 was when I actually started really going to the movies with friends that challenged me as a viewer. And by that, I mean that up until that point, I did have friends, but it was the type of friends that were in my church. So 2014 was when I started hanging out with friends that were outside of the church and really challenged me as a viewer, but also I started watching films that challenged me as well as TV shows that challenged me. So it was just overall a year that I look back fondly in regards to that because it did change me, and for the better, I would say. But there are also several films that also changed me for one way or the other. And I wanted to talk about those movies. I wanted to start from the beginning of 2014 till the end. And then I also wanted to talk about nostalgia, rose-tinted glasses, and cherry picking of movies from past, years and even decades. So I'll talk about all that. But yeah, let me know some of the films that changed you as a viewer. I'm looking forward to seeing that in the comment section down below. And it goes without saying, but yours is going to be different than mine. That's what's great about film as an art form. So enough exposition, guys. Let's get started. So one of the first films that changed me in 2014 was X-Men Days of Future Past. I saw this on May 25th of 2014. This was a film that up until this point, when I would go to the movies, I would see, a movie with friends where it was like one or two friends. This one, I saw it with two friends who to this day I am still friends with. And then I saw it also with my one friend, his girlfriend at the time, and then her friend who ironically now they're dating, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that they are married now. So yeah, that's a long story. It's another story for another time. But anyways, the five of us, we saw this movie and we all enjoyed it. It was such a bonding experience. And also, it was the first X-Men film that I actually really loved. Like, I loved it so much. I remember recommending it to so many different people. I had so much fun watching this movie. And to this day, I still quite like it. I don't love it as much as I did back then because I did have it in my top 250 of all time. It was in my top 10 of 2014. But now it's one of those films I've kind of softened up on. I think it's a good blockbuster, but I do have fond memories of just loving it the way that I did back then. And yeah, it will always have a special place in my heart, and that's why I have it as my number one choice. Well, not number one, but my first choice of films that changed me in 2014. Next up, we have the Grand Budapest Hotel. I saw this on June 9th of 2014. And this film is probably arguably the one that has the most impact on me as a viewer because June 9th of 2014 was when I turned 18. This was my first film as an adult. I will never forget watching it on the cracked iPod screen, and I loved it. I was cracking up, and I just remember saying, wow, this is a perfect film. And a decade later, I still stand by that. It's a perfect film that I try to rewatch every year on my birthday. It's just such a great film. It's a perfect blending of comedy and drama. And I'll never forget that when I went to college, one of my professors, shout out to DeCarmo, he asked me if I, collected Blu-rays. And I said, no, at this point in time, I was just collecting DVDs. But he was like, do you want my copy of the Grand Budapest Hotel? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So he gave me his copy, and that's one of the reasons why I still carry this, because don't get me wrong, of these two, I do think that this is the better version in regards to how it looks, but this is still really good. They both look fantastic, but I do have some, sentimental value for this copy, but love this film. If you haven't seen Grand Budapest Hotel, highly recommend you do so. But again, the first film that I ever saw as an adult, special place in my heart, and my favorite comedy. Next up, speaking of comedies, we have 22 Jump Street. I saw this on June 17th of 2014. And for a little bit of background, I didn't get my license until the following year, excuse me, 2015. So I think up to this point, I didn't even have my permit. So I didn't have any identification other than, I guess you would call it, my social security card. But I was, of course, wasn't going to bring that to the movie theater. So I remember that I had to buy a ticket for another movie. And this was back in the day where it wasn't reserved seating. It was first come, first serve. So I remember watching this with two friends who both had their license. Actually, that's a lie. One of them had their license, but the other didn't. The one was a year younger than me. So I think that Mia and another of my friends, we had to actually buy tickets for another movie and sneak into the theater. And I remember that it was pretty daring, honestly, because it was the type of movie experience where it's like you're watching the movie and you're scrunched like this because it was so packed. But it was great watching because there were so many moments where I was dying of laughter and the audience was as well. It was just a really, really good theater experience. And I just remember saying like, wow, this is almost as good as the first entry. And I really, really enjoyed it. It is a very meta film that to this day, I still love, and that's why I own it on 4K. If you've been sleeping on this film, highly recommend it. Next up, I saw that 22 Jump Street on June 17th of 2014. The following week, I saw The Fault in Our Stars on June 24th, 2014. So, The Fault in Our Stars was a film that, as school was ending towards, the end of the year, a lot of people were recommending this movie to me, in particular females, because at this point in time, I was friends with a handful of females, and they were all saying, oh, you gotta watch it, because for a little bit of context, I was on the morning announcements, so everyone pretty much knew that I was into films and TV shows, like, a lot. So a lot of people were recommending this, and they were saying that it's really sad and everything, and yeah, it is. I think this was the first film that I saw in theaters where I actually cried. Like, I had quite an emotional reaction to this movie, and would I have an emotional reaction to this movie now? I don't think so. I haven't seen it in, 6-7 years, but I have fond memories of seeing this film by myself in theaters and just having that emotional experience and it really hitting hard. It's a film that I still would recommend. I just think that it's not necessarily the great movie that I thought it was in 2014, but again, that visceral experience that I had, it was just something I really quite enjoyed, and yeah, that's why I have this on this list. Next up, I also had a visceral reaction with this movie, but for all the wrong reasons. We have Transformers: Age of Extinction. I saw this on June 26th of 2014, and I will never forget the circumstances for this this viewing experience. So, a little bit of context. As I mentioned, I grew up in a religious household, but I also grew up in a very, very Republican right-wing household. And I myself, at this point in time, was arguably pretty right-wing. And nothing wrong with that. If you are, you are. But for me, it was one of those things that I remember that my church was having an event that was hosting Ben Carson, because I think at this point in time, he was trying to run for president. So, of course, me and my family, we wanted to support that. So I remember we went to the church and we saw just how crowded it was, to the point where we knew we weren't going to actually get inside the church to actually, see him talking and see about him talking about his policies and everything. So what we ended up doing was going back home, and I remember my friends earlier in the day were asking if I, could go to the movies, and I said that I couldn't because I was going to see Ben Carson in my church. And I remember when I got home, I texted them saying, hey, are you guys still down to see this? And they said, yeah. So I remember that I went to the movies with them. It was like a 9 o'clock showing. And we all make mistakes in life, but that was a mistake. I should have just stayed home, because Transformers: Age of Extinction, I hated it. I genuinely hated it. I wasn't open-minded back then, so I remember that my friends were really digging the film, and I remember not liking the fact that they were enjoying the film. And that's something that, again, we live and learn. We all make mistakes. That's something, in retrospect, I don't know why I had that issue. It's one of those things where it's like, if someone else is enjoying something, that's fine. Like, they are their own person, so let them enjoy it. So, again, I admit that was a mistake on my part, but I just remember just not liking the fact that they were enjoying it, and just seeing everything on screen. It was just like, just action porn. It was just so annoying. It was such a frustrating experience, and I just remember being exhausted by it. I did rewatch it a couple years ago, and it's still absolutely terrible. But if you do enjoy this movie, I can appreciate that to an extent, but I still don't like this movie. It's 164 minutes of just noise. But yeah, I'll never forget that experience. It was just exhausting, headache-inducing. But yeah, still, nonetheless, it was a film that changed me. But I will say what's nice is, even though Transformers 4 was the low point of my summer, the high point of my summer did come in August. I saw, on August 7, 2014, I saw the film Boyhood, which is a 12-year journey of following the lead character Mason as he's growing up. And it just had such an impact on me, because the beginning of the film, of course, he's like 6 years old, and by the end, he's heading out to college. And at this point in time, I was getting ready to head out to college. I mean, a couple weeks after watching this film, I was going to college. So it just left me with the feeling of content where I was like excited for college. I wasn't as nervous. So it was one of those things where it was something that felt therapeutic in a lot of ways. And I also remember seeing this with a couple friends that were in the church. And I remember that throughout the movie, they were constantly thinking that something big was going to happen, like a car crash or something. I don't know why. But I afterwards explained to them, I was like, no, it's a slice of life film. So it's one of those things where I was just now getting into slice of life filmmaking and understanding that it's not your typical mainstream type, act 1, 2, 3. It's one of those things where things are happening, and it might not necessarily lead to like an explosive ending, if you will. So I was really starting to appreciate that aspect of the filmmaking process, and Richard Linklater really helped with that because right before I saw Boyhood, I saw the Before trilogy. So I was really I kind of knew what to expect with Boyhood in that regards, like with how he tells stories. But I just remember that this was a film that I felt so positive about afterwards. Like I felt so much affirmed in regards to moving forward in life. And this was a film that also I was hoping was going to win Best Picture. It was, at this point in time, my favorite film of 2014. Now it's not. Like, now it would make my top 10 of 2014 for sure. But it's not a film that I love the way that I did in 2014. But it's still a film that I do think is great. I did rewatch it earlier this year. It does hold up. And I think that it's a film that, am I angry now that it didn't win Best Picture? Back then I was. No, I'm not angry. Now I'm actually kind of happy that it didn't win Best Picture, but I'm still glad that this is a film that really changed me and really helped me with my journey as a film buff, film critic moving forward. So I love Boyhood, and just a film that made me feel quite positive. Next up, so that was in August. There was a couple other movies I saw in August for sure, but September was, specifically towards the end of September, was when Oscar season was starting to gear up, so to speak. And I remember I took a friend who, my one really good friend, I was starting to get to know him like really well. And I took him to the movies, and I didn't realize that he is very sensitive towards violence. So this film was not a good film to show to him, but I'll never forget the experience nonetheless, and that is The Equalizer, which I saw on September 27th of 2014. And I remember thinking it was solid at the time, but the violence, I just remember it being so brutal. And I don't know if it's because I was watching it with a friend that's very, very sensitive to violence, or just the fact that it was very visceral. Either way, it's a film experience that I'll never forget, because the third act, where it's, taking place in the rain and everything, I was just like in awe of it. I was like, wow, this is very cinematic, and I just really liked Denzel Washington's performance. And I remember at the time that I thought it was just solid and that I wasn't probably going to rewatch it, but I just couldn't get the imagery out of my mind, and I've rewatched it several times since, and here we are. I own it on physical media on Blu-ray. So it's a film that it holds up quite well. Like a decade later, I do quite like it. In fact, I give it more than a 3.5 now. I think it's a good film, and just one that I have very fond memories of when I first saw this in theaters a decade ago. Next up, this is a film that I had quite the visceral reaction to, and that is Gone Girl. Gone Girl I saw October 11th of 2014, and you best believe that October 11th, 2024, 10 years later, I rewatched this film. Yes, I did. Gone Girl is a film that I just had such a visceral reaction to the ending. I was so angry. I was angry at women. It was one of those films that I really, really took the wrong way. I will admit that. It was like, looking back, it was like, wow, I took this as like almost an incel, which I guess you could argue I kind of was back then, but it was just like, looking back, I'm like, Chad, like, I am so glad that I'm so glad that I learned from this film now, because now I look at it and I'm like, these individuals both were in the wrong. But when I watched this a decade ago, I immediately went to the woman. I was like, she's in the wrong. She's a terrible person. Not really looking at Nick Dunn and saying like, I mean, he's very flawed too. Now I see more of the gray of these two and their relationship and the toxicity of it, but I didn't really see that back then. But either way, I will never forget the labyrinth journey of this film, like all the twists and turns, the ending, that like angry reaction I had, but in a good way. One of those films that I just have always looked at as perfect, similar to Grand Budapest Hotel, and just a film that I look back fondly on, even if, again, I really misinterpreted the first time I saw it. But nonetheless, an experience that I will forever remember, for sure. But I love Gone Girl. It was my number 2 favorite film of 2014, and ironically, I think it still is my number 2 favorite film of 2014. But, I know, now I think it's actually my number 1. And Grand Budapest Hotel duke it out, honestly. But I love this film. Next up, we have this. We have John Wick, which I saw on October 24th of 2014. And the reason why I was laughing is because I'll never forget watching John Wick, and I had a month before seen The Equalizer, and I was like, oh wow, a one-man person that's, basically attacking Russians in an action format. Oh wow. So like it was just one of those things where it did kind of feel like deja vu, because I was like, I just saw this but with Denzel Washington instead of Keanu Reeves. But I still went into John Wick very positively. Like I was excited for it. And I remember that I took one of my friends, shout out to Ryan Orlando, who saw a lot of these films with me. I'll never forget that he didn't know what this movie was, and I didn't really either. I just heard it was a really good action film. And I'll never forget, we saw this film and we both immediately loved it. And that's one of the nice things about this film. I can say that I've been a fan of John Wick from day one. I know a lot of people became fans like either from the second or third entry, but I was a fan from day one. This was a film that I liked. It's one of those films that I've always wanted to love, but I do think the third act does kind of falter a bit. I don't know if they just kind of lost, some budget by the end, but either way, it is a film that I'm always like, this is great, but then it falters out by the end. But I still quite like it. I'll never forget seeing this in IMAX and just how awesome it was. It's such a loud, bombastic film, but it works so well. And I think the world building of this film is so good. I had such a blast watching this film back in 2014. Next up, we have a film that wasn't a ball watching, but it was a film that I nonetheless loved, and that is Nightcrawler. So Nightcrawler is a film I saw on November 1st of 2014, and I'm filming this on October 26th of 2024, and you best believe that on November 1st, 2024, I do plan on rewatching this film. Nightcrawler is a film that I haven't seen since 2019. I saw plenty of times in the 2010s. Like, I love this film. I think it's fantastic. But it's one of those films that I remember watching and I was just like, wow, this guy will go to any lengths possible. And this and Gonger also really made me question the media and just also understanding different perspectives. So I really admire this film for that, but also just showing the seediness of life. Really kind of geared me towards liking those kind of pessimistic, nihilistic type films. So I really got behind Nightcrawler right away, and I'll never forget seeing this on a Saturday night with a surprisingly packed crowd. I loved this film. It's a mid-budget. Well, actually, I think it's less than mid-budget. I think it was only like $1 or $2 million. So more films like this, guys, please. But yeah, I love Nightcrawler. Next up, we have I remember I saw it the day after Nightcrawler because it was finally went in wide release near me, and that is on November 2nd, 2014. I saw Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. Loved this film right away. I remember that what immediately brought me into the film was the cinematography and then the dialogue. Those are the two aspects that I immediately fell in love with. And the more I watched this film, the more I loved it. To this point in time, I have it in my top 100 favorite films of all time. I love it. I can definitely see why it won Best Picture. I remember at the time I wasn't happy that it won Best Picture, but in retrospect, even though it's not my favorite film of 2014, I'm glad it won Best Picture because it is truly a fantastic film and just one of those films that I showed a bunch of different people. I love seeing their reactions, and it just really brings joy to my life. And I also love the themes that this film tackles. So just an overall great film, a great balance of comedy and drama, and in my eyes, a masterpiece. Next up, this was a film that I saw 4 times in theaters. I saw it on November 7th, 2014. Saw it November 15th, 2014. And then I saw it November 29th, 14, and then November 30th, 2014. Yes, that's right. I was obsessed with this movie. And that is Interstellar. Yes, I saw this film 3 times in IMAX and once in 4K. Yes, there was a 4K screening for this movie. I loved this film. I think it was great. It's still great in my eyes. I think that it is a fantastic film to watch. I will say that on first viewing, I did know the twist 10 minutes in. I remember turning to my friend and saying, oh no. And he was like, what? And I was like, I know what the twist is. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, I've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey. This film is definitely harkening back to Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. But I do think that it makes it its own. And I do think that it is quite entertaining. Although I can't lie, me saying a decade ago that this film is better than 2001: A Space Odyssey was kind of crazy. But now, now 2001: Space Odyssey is one of my favorite films of all time. It's in my top 10. But Interstellar, I still quite like. It is a film that I love. I come back to quite often. And it's a film that I do look forward to rewatching because I think it is coming out in theaters this year in IMAX. So I do plan on rewatching it for its 10-year anniversary. So just a film that's overall embracingly entertaining and just a film that I get a lot from. I really, really like it, and that's why I have it on this list. And next up, we have Whiplash, which I saw on November 15th of 2014. I will never forget seeing this film in theaters, and one of my friends, I kid you not, one of my friends, like 30 minutes in, just started clapping. He was like, 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I was like, dude, the movie's not even over yet. We still have another hour and some change. He was like, oh, it was just a film experience I'll never forget. Not only because of that, but also because I saw this film with 3 friends, and we were all really into this film, and we all just really, really dug this film. I love Whiplash to this day. I think it's fantastic, and I did actually rewatch it less than a month ago, I think, for its 10-year anniversary. It holds up. It's one of my favorite films of all time, and yeah, that's why I have it on this list. It's one of those films that changed me in 2014. And next up, I don't own this on physical media, at least not yet. I need to watch it a third time before deciding. But the last but not least, we have Foxcatcher. I saw this November 28th, 2014. This is one of those films that really brought me down to earth. And by that, I mean that up to this point, I was showing some of my friends, specifically Ryan, Alex Diamond, Kevin Calvin, I was showing these friends a bunch of movies. And it was one of those things where it was like slam dunk. They were liking it. But I showed 3 friends this movie. And I remember that we all really weren't into this film. Like, we were all falling asleep watching this film. We all thought it was kind of slow, kind of dull. And I remember I gave it like a middle-of-the-road type rating, at least for the time. But it's one of those films that I decided to revisit a couple years ago, and I liked it better, even if my rating was kind of the same. But I'll just never forget watching this film in theaters and just all of us kind of having a uneasy kind of experience watching it by just like, oh wow, this is so slow, this is so boring. So I realized that, you know, you're not always going to have films that people are going to love. Sometimes, a film is going to bring people together, but might not necessarily be because they love it. This was one of those films, but now I do respect this film quite a bit. I do see why a lot of people loved it when it came out, but it's not a film that I've just yet fully embraced, but it's a film that I acknowledge that it did change me and brought me back down to earth, saying like, yeah, there are going to be some films that you show people that might not necessarily hit the same way for you. But yeah, those are some of the films that changed me in 2014. I did want to mention, I spoke to some of my friends that I watched movies with in 2014, and some of them have what I call rose-tinted glasses, where they're like, that was such a great year for films. They just don't make films like that anymore. And I rebutted with, it's not that they don't make movies like that anymore. They do. It's just harder to find them because the way the market is now, you're not going based off of TV ads. You're not really going based off of word of mouth per se. Now there's social media, so it's a lot harder to get the word of mouth actually out there. There's also a lot less time for things to build. And by that, I mean that movies used to come out, and then you would have it where several months later, movies would come out in physical media and also digitally. So it built word of mouth and it built anticipation for those films when they were then coming out in physical media and digital. There's not that case anymore with that window of time. Now it's the type of thing, a movie will be in theaters and then a couple weeks later it'll be on digitally. So it's one of those things where we have all these movies now more than ever at the tip of our fingernails. But it's one of those things where, because of that, it makes it overwhelming. And a lot of times when people are overwhelmed, they're not going to want to try to actually, take a chance on a movie. They're going to want to go with something that they know is safe. So they go based off of the brand as opposed to the director or the star or the script writer, whatever the case may be. So I believe personally that every single year in film, there are terrible movies. There are okay movies. There are solid films. There are great films. There are masterpieces every single year. It's just one of those things now, it's a lot more difficult to find them because we are all adults now. When I was watching all these movies a decade ago, we were 18 to 20 years old. So it was a lot easier to actually find time to try to figure out which movies are the ones where it was like, oh, wow, I think these are going to be great. So again, things change over time, but these are some of the reasons why I think that, yes, 2014 was a great year in films. But that doesn't mean that there weren't bad movies in 2014. There still were, and there still were, movies that I thought were okay. But, excuse me, that being said, 2014, I will always feel nostalgic towards some of those movies because of the impact that they had for me as a viewer, especially since I was personally changing as a viewer and I was actually being introduced to movies that changed me and my moral compass. Such movies as like Nightcrawler or Birdman, movies that changed me in regards to actually making me question my own morals. That's something I really appreciated about that. But that's also more so the fact that I was, getting older, not necessarily the movies itself. Because if I were to watch some movies from this year, 2024, such as like Challengers or Strange Darling, those are movies that they would challenge me as an 18-year-old. But again, that's my point. Every year you can be challenged by movies. It just depends on where you are in life. And that's what I love about films, is that they are amazing. They really are. So yeah, what are some of the films though that changed you? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, guys, really appreciate the support and the subscription, notification bell. Follow me on Letterboxd, and I will catch you guys later.